All right, ready to dive into some economic news.
Always. Especially with the election right around the corner.
So true. Seems like everyone's holding their breath a little.
Yeah, and the news itself is kind of a mixed bag right now.
That's why we're here, untangling it all.
Absolutely.
We've got a stack of reports here. AP News, CNBC, even the Census Bureau.
Wow. Sounds like a comprehensive deep dive.
It is. Let's start with that big GDP number. 2.8% growth in the third quarter.
That's pretty solid. Surprised a lot of folks who are predicting a recession.
Me too. Politico called it surprisingly strong.
It is. But here's the thing. Voter sentiment doesn't seem to match that strength.
Really? Why is that?
That's the million-dollar question. AP even pointed out that some economists are scratching their heads about it.
Huh? Economy's doing well, but people aren't feeling it.
Right. And, high inflation earlier this year, even though it's cooled down, might still be lingering in people's minds.
Makes sense. And those mortgage rates.
Oof. Don't get me started.
7%, right.
Yeah, hovering around there. Even with the Fed cutting rates recently.
So what's going to make people feel confident about the economy again? I mean, especially with the election and all the potential changes coming up.
Well, Fast Company had an interesting take on that. They said some of this anxiety about potential policy changes is actually contributing to those high mortgage rates.
Wait, so fear of the future is messing with things right now?
Exactly, kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Wow. Okay, so we've got this underlying anxiety, but then CNBC reports consumer confidence actually jumped in October.
It did. Highest level since March 2021.
So people are saying they feel good about the economy.
About the current situation, yeah, and the outlook for the next 6 months, too.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Maybe it takes time for those positive economic indicators to really sink in.
Could be. Could be. Just think what might happen if that positive sentiment really takes hold.
Yeah, imagine the possibilities.
Ah.
Okay, let's talk jobs. September saw more jobs added than expected. Unemployment dipped to 4.1%.
Sounds pretty good.
Right. But then CNBC also mentioned that job openings actually tumbled to their lowest point since January 2021.
Ah, yeah. Mixed signals again.
It is a bit of a puzzle, but the labor market is still considered strong.
For sure. And hires actually rose in September. Plus, we got that surprise surge in private job creation in October.
Hold on, break that down. What surge?
The ADT report. 233,000 jobs added just in October. Private sector, that is.
Whoa, so even with the hurricanes and those labor disruptions, businesses are still hiring.
It seems so. Throws a bit of a wrench into those slowdown predictions.
No kidding. Wonder how the Fed's going to react to this.
Yeah, robust job market might make them hesitate on further rate cuts, even with inflation above their target.
Talk about a balancing act.
It is, and all this with Election Day looming.
Oh, yeah. Can't forget about that. Speaking of things we can't forget, what about that trade deficit?
Right. Forex Live said it widened significantly in September. Highest since the pandemic.
Yikes. What's driving that?
Well, businesses were importing goods early to avoid potential disruptions from those dock worker strikes.
Right. Makes sense. So where does this leave us? Strong economy, but inflation concerns, widening trade deficit, and an election that could really shake things up.
It's a lot. But hold on. Before we wrap up, I want to throw in a little global perspective.
Sure. Always up for expanding our horizons.
So the U.S. economy, it's actually been outperforming other richer countries.
Really? For how long?
Decades, not just a few years. We're talking long term here.
No way. So this isn't just a recent phenomenon.
Not at all. Marketplace reported that even the average wages in America's poorest state are higher than those in places like Britain, Canada, Germany.
That's incredible. But here's the thing. Why don't more Americans feel that success?
Right. That's a question worth digging into. And guess what? We'll be tackling that in the next part of our deep dive. We're going to look at things like inequality, social policies, why this economic strength isn't trickling down to everyone's everyday experience.
That's the piece I'm most curious about. Can't wait to unpack it all.
Me neither. It's going to be a fascinating discussion.
Absolutely. Join us for part 2 where we'll delve even deeper.
Back again, ready for more deep diving.
Ready as I'll ever be.
Good, because we've got a lot more to uncover.
We left off talking about this interesting paradox that the U.S. economy outperforming other countries, but many Americans not feeling it.
Exactly. And we touched on the fact that even the lowest earners in the U.S., on average, are making more than folks in some pretty well-off countries.
Right, like Britain, Canada, Germany.
Exactly. Marketplace had a great piece on that.
Challenged some assumptions for sure.
It did. But then the question becomes, if the economy's so strong, why aren't more Americans feeling financially secure?
Yeah, that's what I keep coming back to. Is it all just perception? Or is there something deeper going on?
Well, perception is part of it, for sure. But remember that Marketplace article also mentioned inequality.
Right.
It pointed out that while the overall U.S. economy is doing well, the wealth generated isn't being distributed very evenly.
So maybe it's not about how big the pie is, but how it's sliced.
That's a great way to put it. And that brings us to the question of social policies.
Okay, how so?
Think about it how a country invests in things like education, healthcare, social safety nets. All of that impacts individual well-being, especially for those who are most vulnerable.
So, like, a strong economy needs a strong social foundation, too.
You could say that. It's kind of like having a powerful engine in a car, but neglecting the brakes and steering. You might be able to go fast, but it's going to be a bumpy, risky ride.
Love the analogy. And I guess that's what makes this election so important. Those are exactly the kinds of things the candidates are debating.
Right. The role of government, how to address inequality. These are huge questions with real-world consequences.
Exactly. So for everyone listening, remember, this isn't just about abstract economic theories. It's about how these different approaches could directly affect your life, your finances, your access to healthcare.
Your job security, your community.
Absolutely. And speaking of things that affect everyone's lives, the housing market.
Oh, yeah, gotta talk about housing.
We touched on those high mortgage rates earlier, 7%, despite the Fed's rate cuts.
Stubbornly high. And Fast Company pointed out a few things driving that: easing recession fears, low unemployment.
And the anxiety about potential policy changes after the election.
Exactly. It's like everyone's trying to predict the future and making decisions based on those predictions, which then impacts the market itself.
It's enough to make your head spin.
For sure. Housing market's always complex, especially tied in with the broader economy. But if we look at some of the data CNBC highlighted, there might be some signs of a slowdown in certain areas.
Okay, what kind of signs?
Well, for example, the fact that job openings have dropped to their lowest level since January 2021.
Could signal a cooling labor market?
Right, and that often has a ripple effect on demand for housing.
Makes sense. But then, didn't we also see that massive surge in private job creation from the ADP report?
We did. And then there's the widening trade deficit that Forex Live reported on, reaching its highest point since the pandemic.
So once again, we're getting those mixed signals.
It's true. And all of these things can indirectly impact the housing market, too, because they affect overall economic growth and consumer confidence.
It's a lot to keep track of, all these interconnected factors influencing the economy, the housing market, and ultimately our own personal finances.
You got it. But it's important to remember the human element here, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Behind all these numbers and reports are real people making decisions about where they want to live, how they can afford it.
That's such a crucial point. Sometimes we get so caught up in the data that we forget about the real-world impact.
Exactly. So as we head into the last part of our deep dive, let's keep that human element front and center.
Great idea.
We'll explore what all this means for you, the listener, and how you can navigate this complex economic landscape and make informed decisions. Decisions that align with your values and your goals.
Back for the final stretch of our economic deep dive. Feeling informed.
Definitely. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? Growth, confidence, jobs, housing, trade. It's all connected.
It is. And sometimes it feels like a puzzle, right? The U.S. economy looks strong on paper, but a lot of Americans aren't feeling that success personally.
Exactly. And I think that's what's driving a lot of the uncertainty we're seeing, especially with the election coming up.
So let's shift gears a bit. What does all this mean for the average person? How can people listening actually use this information?
Good question. First thing to remember, the economy's always changing. What's true today might not be true tomorrow.
So be ready to adapt.
Exactly. Flexibility is key. And don't get too caught up in those day-to-day market fluctuations.
Easy to say, hard to do sometimes.
I know, right? But try to focus on those long-term financial goals. Make decisions that align with what you want to achieve in the long run.
That makes sense. Keep your eye on the prize, even when things get a little bumpy.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask for help. There are tons of resources out there, financial advisors, websites, even podcasts.
Hey, there you go. Shameless plug for informed listening.
But seriously, knowledge is power, right? Especially when it comes to your finances.
Couldn't agree more. And with Election Day just around the corner, well, we can't ignore the potential impact that's going to have.
Absolutely not. We talked about those different visions each candidate has for the economy.
Growth, inflation, jobs, housing, trade. They've got different approaches to it all.
They do. So as you head to the polls, Think about which policies align with your values and priorities.
It's your chance to shape the economic future, right?
Exactly. But remember, voting is just one piece of it. Stay engaged, stay informed, keep these conversations going, even after the election's over.
Well said. And, before we wrap up, it's worth repeating something we talked about earlier.
What's that?
The economy. It's about more than just numbers on a spreadsheet.
It's about people.
Exactly. It affects our livelihoods, our well-being, our shared future.
So let's keep that in mind when we talk about these issues.
Let's have those discussions with empathy, understanding, and a commitment to making things better for everyone, not just a select few.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Hope you learned something new.
Me too. Until next time, everyone, stay curious.